Welcome to another edition of Carnivore Bites. I'm your host, Jeff Sherman, along with Dr. Eric Lopkin. And we're going to start out with something that I basically admit to. Had a little senior moment. Forgot about the Don Lemon story. Although, in my own mind, we kind of been talking about that for a while. It was inevitable. But the hammer finally came down. Your thoughts on the very astute Mr. Lemon? I know the world and the media is missing a true genius.
Yeah, he was fired the same day Tucker Carlson was fired. And the contrast between the two is amazing because Tucker Carlson is going to have no problem doing whatever he
The
wants
world is his
because
oyster, as they
he
say.
had the ratings behind him. Don Lemon, nobody is offering him jobs.
Oh no,
MSNBC
you're wrong.
might.
You're wrong. Cable access, I believe a
Well,
station in Montana offered him. Obviously, you don't get paid, but he can still be on the air officially, waiting for his
yeah, he can
next big moment.
he can pay cable access all he wants to be on the air, but nobody is paying him
No one in
because
their right mind
what
would do it. How does that sound?
what it came down to is he was a toxic personality to the people he worked with. His ratings kept dropping. There was nothing to save his career. And even CNN, who, let's face it, they kept him on because he checked boxes. And
Yes.
even they had to say, enough is enough. You're out of here.
Yeah, and then not only was he a toxic individual, and by the way, he of course blamed or suggested racism played a role. No, racism did not play a role. Stupidity and incompetence played a role. Okay, he was toxic, but he was also about as interesting as watch. I think watching paint dry actually might be more interesting because you can at least see how your new room's going to look.
Yeah, apparently, as stories have leaked out, there were some major altercations between him and his co hosts. He was abusive to them. And that was what finally made CNN go, all right, enough is enough. He does not have the ratings to justify this.
Unlike, as you mentioned, Tucker, who they had a fill-in. I forgot his name. He's an African American guy. Nice enough.
Well,
He's good, maybe for and maybe Saturday morning, something like that. But they've ratings have fallen off by upwards of 1 million.
well, Lawrence Jones took
He's
over the
okay.
spot temporarily.
Oh, I got it.
He
I
was,
know. I understand that, but
yeah.
compared
And
to the impact of Tucker's, quite a drop off.
yeah, but that's something else. I found the stories about the ratings hysterical because you had the liberals dancing in the streets that Fox's ratings were down, and
Hmm.
you had the extreme right dancing in the streets going, "Oh, see, Fox was wrong to get rid of our boy Tucker and their ratings are down." When you actually look at it, however, yes, the ratings dropped in Tucker's Tucker Carlson's time slot. And they don't yet have a permanent fill in or what's going to go in that slot. However, if you look at Fox overall, the Five is still the top show on cable. Gutfeld is still ruling late night.
Oh,
It
wait.
did.
Before you go on, I find that fascinating that Gutfeld is beating Colbert. I don't even remember Jimmy Kimmel. Obviously, I know the NBC guy is just unwatchable. I mean, Carson's
Well,
probably spinning, not rolling,
yeah,
spinning in his grave. So isn't it amazing that he's kicking their ass? Because he's funny, even if you're not conservative. These guys, the other guys, Colbert is not funny. He's just an activist.
and that's the big
He's a
problem
shill.
that's happened with late night. And now late night is for the time being over because the writers have gone on strike. So all of the late night talk shows, with the exception, I think Gutfeld is still going because I think they don't use they don't have scripted material.
Okay,
But
can I just interject one thing about the writers' strike? Dating myself, but who cares? I think it was in the mid '80s they had a writers' strike. It was extremely significant. I think it's like a tempest in a teapot. I don't think anyone even gives a shit.
I don't know that they do or not. Honestly, the
I mean, the
writers have
world goes on if
yeah,
Colbert isn't isn't broadcast.
Well,
Believe me.
that actually brings up a good point that I'm curious to see what happens because with no Colbert, no Kimmel, Fallon was less of an activist, but Kimmel and Colbert were out there. The Daily Show was out there constantly beating the drum. And SNL is also not going to be doing any new episodes. I have to wonder without those four shows, what happens to Biden's approval rating? Because
No,
they,
whoa, whoa. Excellent point, Doc. They were the, let's just say, a mystery or phantom foundation propping this idiot up.
yeah, they were the cheerleaders, and
There you go.
now they're out of the picture for a little while.
Thank God.
I wonder what kind of effect it's going to have. But getting back to Fox's ratings, except for the one time slot that Tucker Carlson was in, haven't suffered at all. So they're going to come through this fine. And it's all of this is part of a media meltdown because you have CNN falling apart. You've
Well,
got
interesting. We said
Tucker.
this as we prepped for the podcast. I saw an interesting little segment by Bill O'Reilly. It was an interesting podcast, I have to say, not as good as ours, obviously. But he was talking about CNN. He was actually hysterical, and something I've always, a pet peeve of mine. He was talking about they have to completely clean house. Okay, it's beyond Don Lemon. It's the whole gang. He even actually mentioned Anderson Cooper by name. He's like, how long is it going to take for CNN management to understand that if you could have a dinosaur in the studio and with Anderson Cooper, and no one would tune in to either him or Jay Tapper. It's the lineup, dummy.
Yeah,
It sucks.
it is amazing right now.
Anderson Cooper sucks.
CNN is resting their hopes on Gail King and Charles Barkley of all people. So
That's like I'm resting my hopes on being the next NBA superstar.
yeah,
Zero. Gail King is sometimes God shines on you even though you have no talent. She has literally zero talent. It wasn't for Oprah. She'd be Good Morning Connecticut.
which she was for a while.
That's what I'm
It's her.
saying.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's her.
Traffic on A84 is pretty heavy. Back to the studio. There
That's
you go.
pretty much it. So you've got all of this going on, and now you've also got liberal media network Vice going by the wayside.
Which was funny because it had all the fanfare that you could ever imagine. It was always a house of cards to the point when they, believe it or not, hired people to be in the office kind of as props if they had visitors from, let's say, the financial or media outlets. It was pretty hysterical.
Yeah,
Such high hopes.
Vice was
Goodbye.
Vice was always a house of cards, and the big problem wasn't even that they were liberal or conservative or what their viewpoint was. The problem was the business model of Vice was flawed from day one because their business model was we're going to produce news programs for people that don't watch news programs.
There you go. We're going to do a football program for people who don't like sports.
Exactly.
There you go. Yes,
It
excellent.
would be like the Bud Light influencer being hired for Monday Night Football.
Well, speaking of Bud Light, there's an article I read that was very interesting. That obviously you don't have to be a genius to figure out sales are still plummeting, and the king, which Bud Light is the king of beers, could be dethroned. That impactful. Talk about woke and broke. This is like a new level.
Yeah, they're losing market share
Sitting
hand
in the
over
stores.
fist. I have to say I have noticed an uptick in other beer
Yeah,
advertising. Their competitors jumped on this, and it's not even just Anheuser-Busch that's suffering now. There was a story, there was a bar that decided to defend Anheuser-Busch and Bud Light, and they said, "You know what? If you're going to diss Bud Light for what they did, we don't need you. We don't want you as a customer. And they posted this on their social media feed. Well, 2 weeks later, they posted on their social media feed that they're in dire need of customers because all of the people that they had alienated by defending Bud Light left.
Okay, who was in charge of that bar? They obviously have a drinking problem and a
Clearly.
mental cognition problem. Yeah, defending that was not exactly a genius move. The initial concept was beyond belief, and to defend that, you kind of sometimes in life deserve what you get. I'm not crying, shedding any tears for that bar. But I consider this still like kind of a media event. And speaking of a media event, Joe Rogan, believe it or not, on his podcast said the only hope that the Democrats have is if Biden dies. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not so sure that's a hope for them. That's actually a big fear for Democrats because they've already rigged the primary in his favor, despite the fact that RFK Jr. is already, with barely any campaigning, pulling 20% of the votes. The
Agree. And
DNC
by the
has
way, let me
decided.
interject something. I saw him on. I'm going to butcher the name, so I'm not even going to say he's out of Philadelphia on CNN. I think he's really good, actually. They should boom to prime time. But anyway, he was RFK Jr. was on the show. I liked a lot of things of what he said, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. And you don't have to be exactly Tolstoy for this to happen to you. Is I'm thinking if he ever was on a debate stage with Uncle Joe, it would be an electrocution. There's no way they can let that happen.
And
Zero.
that's
Even like I said,
that's
even though
why
he's got almost 20%, he's coherent, he's interesting, he's actually, like you always say, the old Democratic Party. Reasonable.
Exactly. And that's why the DNC is not having any debates. Now, I think if we had a real media, and I know for a fact that Fox would actually like to do this, but the Democrats won't go along with it. But one of the media networks should put together their own debate. Invite RFK, invite Marianne Williamson, invite Joe Biden, and then let the Biden campaign explain why Biden's not
Okay, they wouldn't do that
participating.
because of your point, because they're in the tank. But an interesting concept. CNN has to start differentiating themselves. It's differentiate or die. They're having Trump in a town hall, much to the chagrin by the liberal establishment. I think they should hire you, Dr. Lopkin, as a consultant because that would be a fantastic move.
Yes,
It would get viewers. They
CNN
need to
should
shake it up. It would be, and then
absolutely.
Biden campaign would have to say something.
And the thing is, the DNC does not have to endorse it. If a media company says, we are inviting you to a debate, let's face it, with the DNC already saying they're not going to have debates, I'm willing to bet both Williamson and Kennedy would jump at the chance to be on a debate. And then the ball's in Biden's court to say yes or no. And if he avoids the debate, he's got to explain why. Because the American public is already, I mean, 70% of the country does not want him running. 51% of the Democrats don't want him running. The fact of the matter is, if he were to win at the end of his second term, he would be 84 years old. The average lifespan for an American male is 82. It is a very real possibility. And I actually heard somebody say this best: every day of a Biden presidency could be Kamala Harris's inauguration.
No question about it. But even yes, that's a more than a valid point. But even regardless of that very dire possibility, every hour his cognition exponentially declines. I mean, he's at the point that he's incapable of a debate, which he was a year and a half ago. He was capable of. I didn't say he did a great job, but he was capable of. He cannot have a press conference without rigged questions. I mean, this guy, and
He
also he's so out there that he called a person of color that basically told him, and Muslim by the way, to hush boy
Yeah, Biden's racist past keeps coming back, but
because he's
in
not
terms,
in control of
yep,
his mental state. So
and
his old views come to the forefront. He's
in
got no
terms
filter.
of his cognition, the world saw it not even a week ago when he could not handle a question from children. When he was talking to the kids of his staffers in the media on Bring Your Child to Work Day, they asked one child asked him, "What was the last country you went to?" Okay? He just came back from Ireland, a trip they made such a big deal about because it had such personal meaning for him. He was exploring his roots and he couldn't remember Ireland. Another child had to finally yell out and jog his memory.
Probably paid by the White House staff. There
Yeah.
you go. Just kidding, obviously. Well, speaking of the political landscape, John McLaughlin, a very highly regarded pollster, basically reflecting on the Republican primary, basically saying that DeSantis, for some reason, is just kind of in a free fall. It used to be a relatively close 52-40 Trump DeSantis. Now it's 50. It's well above that. Okay, DeSantis is in the 16 percentile. And anyway, the thing that I found interesting, not really the DeSantis situation that's been going on for a couple of months now, but John McLaughlin, his polling indicates that Trump is actually leading Biden by a substantial margin, not double digits, but an appreciable. That's a better word. Margin. Your thoughts? Could that
Yeah,
be possible?
the idea that Biden can beat Trump again is by no means certain. I mean, is it possible? Absolutely. But the Democrats are tossing their hats into Biden's ring because they think he can beat Trump again. The problem is in 2020, Biden did not have a track record to run on. Now you're already seeing the economy is slowing. The southern border is a disaster.
And even Christian
It
cinema, is at odds with Biden, basically saying, it's obviously apparent what's going on. Anyone can see this, and she's critical of his southern border,
well,
even though the press secretary says that incursions are down 90%. Let's have another beer, okay? Let's smoke
yeah,
another joint. Are you kidding me?
the press secretary has no idea what she's talking about. And in her defense, she's only allowed to talk about the facts that the administration gives her. So it's not like she's saying this. This is the administration's problem. Biden, in fact, the Washington Post fact checker gave Biden a bottomless Pinocchio because he keeps repeating lies about cutting the deficit. And the Washington Post has called him out on it. And now they finally just said he's not stopping his telling of this lie. So they gave him a bottomless Pinocchio. And they've done this before to Biden because he does not know what he's talking about. He's just making things up.
No
And in
question. And in fact, on the debt, if spending levels, he's always touting that he's the debt cutter. Yeah, okay. If the spending levels were 2019 levels, we'd have a surplus. Yet Biden is not. He refuses to negotiate with the House on the debt.
Well, Biden is still refusing to negotiate. They are supposed to meet next week, but Biden is
But that's
claiming
off the table.
this will not be a negotiation. He may not have a choice because both Sinema and Manchin have indicated they will back the bill that passed the House already. And because it is a financial bill and has budget implications, the Republicans can do what the Democrats have been doing for the last 2 years and push it through reconciliation So they only need 51 votes, which they may already have.
That's a very real possibility. And speaking of a possibility, I don't know how real it is. There's talk of Joe Manchin leaving. It's been done before the Democratic Party. I don't know how real that is, but it's certainly making the news. And he's had increasing contact with an organization called No Labels, a bipartisan group. He got screwed by Chucky and by Biden. I mean, he's pretty pissed off. His political future very precarious, to say the least. Does he make a move? I don't think so, but it's not beyond the realm of possibilities.
It's not beyond the realm of possibility. Remember, Kirsten Sinema is now an independent. She left the Democratic Party. So and it's happening more and more often. What I find absolutely hysterical in this whole debt battle is Schumer and Biden keep saying, no, we need a clean raise of the debt ceiling with nothing else in it. And then we'll come back and talk about cutting spending.
Yeah, the
Excuse
checks
me,
in the mail.
what do you think Joe Manchin is going to say about this? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me.
And
There is
fool me twice. Uh, Shame on my electoral possibilities, because then it would be game. If he doesn't make a stand on this, he is politically
Yeah, I
very
mean,
much compromised.
Joe Manchin has seen them do this before. They screwed him over. There is no credibility to that idea.
No question about it. And speaking of the economy and Biden's future, I don't think the planets are aligned. They were aligned for him with COVID because he could be Basement Joe. But there's increasing speculation by economists, not just the media. Over 65%, actually 67%, believe that a recession is likely. And Larry Summers, former Obama political, or I'm sorry, economic advisor. Get your leisure suit ready, because he says it's a real possibility for a return of the 1970s stagflation. That is high inflation with no growth, a prescription for disaster. And that's
Well,
not going to bode well, because one thing I truly believe, and plus the bank failures that are increasingly becoming more alarming. I think anytime you're going to have a bad situation, people vote with their pocketbook still, and also you have someone that's clearly cognitively impaired, so he's not going to look good trying to respect. He's going to have to answer questions eventually if this does happen, if it does come to fruition.
yeah, he's going to have to answer questions, but he's got a big economic problem. GDP came out growing 1.1%, which was slower than expected. We just about an hour ago or so had the Fed raise interest rates again, another quarter point. Biden created this problem all by himself because the runaway inflation was caused by runaway government spending. The Fed has been trying to rein it in with these interest rate hikes, but interest rate hikes not just slow the economy, they can bring it to a recession.
A
And it
la
is
1980 with Paul Volcker, who did it on purpose. He actually had a brain, broke the back of inflation, but also broke the back. It was a mini depression back in 80, 81. Again, people are relatively okay even with the inflation, that the economy's, jobs are decent. But if the shit hits the fan economically, I believe that could really bode well for Trump, because people will
it
hold their nose and say, okay, the guy's an asshole, but at least I can live financially with this asshole. I can't live with Weekends at Bernie's Part Two.
Yeah, you're starting to see the job numbers came out that the number of open jobs has dropped again. So there's fewer jobs out there. There's still more jobs out there than there are people looking, but that number keeps coming down. And there's another problem that Biden is going to be facing. The Democrats have been relying very heavily on young voters. Well, millennials, there was a new survey that came out. The oldest millennials are now hitting 40, and they're going, My economic prospects haven't gotten any better since my 20s.
No, it's a perpetual
So,
state of despair.
yeah, so they're not excited about Biden. The Gen Z couldn't care less about him. There is a strong possibility that the left wing young voter
To
will
stay home.
stay home. Yes.
I think it's a real possibility. Another real possibility is the Hunter Biden civil suit that's ongoing. That there's basically indications that he might have to release financial records that could be detrimental to the Biden crime family.
Yeah, it looks like they are going to have to release more records. They submitted redacted taxes to the judge, and the judge in this case basically ripped them a new one. The judge is not putting up with this. And, Biden, the thing is, Hunter Biden, again, brought this on himself because he's the one that brought this to the court because he wanted his child support amount dropped, claiming poverty, claiming he can't afford the child support that the courts ordered him to pay. Really, if Biden's economy is so great, how come Hunter can't afford child support?
Well, crack's pretty expensive. Inflation affects everything, my friend.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting. Also, in a very serious note, on the world stage, Putin. There's reports that Putin just survived an assassination attempt via drone, and also Iran has seized another oil tanker in the Strait of Hormuz. The first one is not obviously related, but the Iranian situation points to the fact that Iran is becoming just tremendously emboldened with weekend at Bernie's in the White House. Your thoughts on both?
Yeah, the Iran situation is untenable. They are reaching out more and more militarily. They're striking in the Strait of Hormuz. And yes, they would not have dared to do this if we had a real leader in the White House. Now, the Russian situation has absolutely nothing to do with us, Biden, or
No,
even
no, no.
you
I agree with that. Yes.
or even Ukraine, quite frankly, because the Russians are claiming it's the Ukrainians that tried to assassinate Putin. Really? You think an unmanned drone can be flown from Ukraine 500 miles to the Kremlin without being detected
It was an
until,
inside job.
yes, until it was right by the Kremlin, and then it was allegedly two drones. One they blew up, the other flew into a flagpole. This was not Ukraine. This was an inside job because Putin is looking for an excuse to escalate. And since Russia had been criticized for using drones against civilians, now they're going to try to use this to say, "Oh well, look, they're using drones against our leaders, so it's all fair in war." And Russia made this story up.
I think that facts would indicate that. Yes, that's fairly obvious and a very ill-conceived assassination plot. We'll leave it at that. Two things on the political stage. Lee Zeldin is considering running against Christian Gillibrand, who I remember her in the Democratic primaries of 2020 2019. Just a complete incompetent idiot. I think he's got a shot.
He does have a shot. He did very well in the
He rescued the
gubernatorial race.
Republican Party in the
Uh,
House.
yes, he had enough coattails to bring Republican candidates into the House from deep blue New York. I think he's got a real chance. Hildebrandt has never been a major candidate. She, if I recall correctly, she initially won the seat campaigning on the fact that her husband was killed on Metro North. This is going way back when. And she was basically handed the seat by Hillary Clinton.
Pretty much, yes. And she
She's
proved herself.
done.
She did prove herself to be a completely out of touch elitist buffoon in the even in the Democratic. She didn't make it past square one.
Yeah,
Deservingly so, by the way.
yeah, she's done nothing. She's been in office because it's deep blue. But that may be changing. Again, we saw Republicans gain House seats in New York. Eric Adams has destroyed New York City. And now, of course, he's to sort of deflect from the disaster his administration has been. He's blaming Greg Abbott for shipping illegal migrants to black run cities because he's a racist. It's like, no, he's shipping them to sanctuary cities, cities that said, yes, we will take the illegal migrants. And
Just
he's,
like Martha's Vineyard, they couldn't get
yes,
rid of him fast enough. And by the way, Adams is a real huge disappointment. Not exactly a Mensa candidate. You think from his predecessor, just a light bulb could do better, but nope, he's taken the previous administration and continued the brilliance.
yeah, his big initiative so far is
Robot.
to get New Yorkers to stop eating meat on Fridays
You
because
have
he
people
think,
dying in the streets. I agree
yeah,
with. And
and
this
that's,
idiot.
yeah, that's where his focus is.
Well, we've talked about this a lot on Carnivore Bites. It's the the rampant anti-Semitism in the Democratic Party. I still scratch my head and why are there even such a thing called Democratic Jews? But you had a member of the squad, Talib, basically getting a conflict with Debbie Wasserman Schultz, which I don't have a lot of empathy or sympathy for because why are you still in this party? Can't you see it's anti-Semitic? Hello. But anyway, again, surprise, surprise, until he basically railed against Israel and obviously had some suggestions that tints more than tints of anti-Semitism. Isn't it about time that this charade stop?
It
In
isn't,
other words, it's not the Democratic Party of 1960. It's
no, it
overdue.
definitely isn't. But I'm actually hopeful that this may mark a turning point because for those listeners who are not familiar with Wasserman, she's the one that controls the purse strings for Democratic reelection campaigns. So Talib getting into an argument with her is absolutely moronic because Wasserman can go, you know what? We're not supporting you for reelection.
Well, Talib's a thug. I mean, I don't know how she got, in office, but a rampant anti-Semite and just very hateful as well. Um, again, I hope this is a wake-up call for many of our Jewish listeners out there that just because 1960 already Woodstock already happened. Okay, move on. It's over. Um, Another great show, Dr. Lobkin. I didn't forget Don Lemon this time. How could you forget a guy like that is capable of that? And tell our listeners about how they can contribute to the show if they'd like.
Yes, let us know what you think, what issues are important to you, and what your opinions are. Go to exvadio.com/connect. That's exvadio.com/connect. Let us know what you think. And of course, while you're there, you can catch every episode of Carnivore Bites at exvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Carnivore Radio website, Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Audible, and other platforms that respect freedom of speech.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Lopkin, and we'll be back next week.
We'll see you then.